So a few years back, I was working with Ann Maki, who at the time was complex area superintendent of Nanakuli Waianae complex area. And things were really turning around in that area in terms of the numbers of kids who were being suspended, and greatly reducing that. The number of kids who are being absences and being more present in school. Even their teacher turnover was shrinking. And in asking Anne, what is that secret? She said, our schools have really embraced trauma-informed practices, and they've learned strategies to put in protective factors so that students and their families and the surrounding community can grow to be more resilient, can be more positive about the experiences they had. And she credited in large part Godwin Higa in looking at how to make their schools more trauma-informed, and did a simple Google search, and the first person or face that popped up was her former classmate from Castle High School, Godwin. And it seemed to be just kismet that he appeared. Godwin is a retired principal from San Diego, and his school was the first trauma-informed school in that area. Today, Godwin works tirelessly across the state of California as well as in Hawaii to spread the word of trauma-informed practices and restorative practices, and to help our community both locally as well as across California to become more trauma-informed and to help youth. And so really it's our honor and pleasure to have Godwin here today. You're going to learn a lot. I'm just confident of it. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Godwin.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I met Anne about 3 years ago, and I was really surprised when she popped up and she asked me to call her. But I think the start of this adventure was one that I really wanted to share with all schools. But Anne, as a area superintendent, took it to a more important level and made it serious. And she brought 35 of her teachers, principals, district staff to San Diego and visited the school, Cherokee Point Elementary. And you're going to see a video about the school in a minute. And then I knew that she was very serious because a lot of people want to know about the school, but they never really take action. So Anne and her group came and we had a all-day session with teachers. She met students and all that, and she went through different classrooms, and it was really amazing. So I want to give her a big kudos because she was the one that started all of this and brought it back to Hawaii. And we worked in Nanakuli Waianae for the last 2 years, 2.5 years. She got them to train all the principals. I went with her and trained teachers, counselors. All her entire staff are trained with trauma-informed and restorative justice practices. And that's where, and I'll share with you later some of the results of Nanakuli Waianae, some of the data that they have that prove that this is something that will work. So her staff, Jason and others, really worked hard in training all the principals and staff and whatnot while I was back in San Diego. And I would come back and work in all the different schools that they created a schedule for me. So that worked out really good. But to start, I would like to share with you a short video. Let's see if it's gonna work. And this is in honor of you and the love and caring of the people of Hawaii. And let me share this with you real quick. Can you hear me?
Godwin, we can hear you, but the audio from the videos wasn't coming through.
It told me it logged me out. So let me try this again. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that.
While we're waiting for Godwin's video to pop up, just want to make mention that our members of our steering committee have joined us today. Josh Levinson, as I mentioned before, he'll be monitoring the chat. Nathan French, who's from our Windward District Office, Behavioral Health Services. And then Candice Frontero, who's actually on her phone right now. And so she'll be joining us a little bit later by her computer. And she'll be closing up the session today. And she's from the Kailua Kalaheo Complex. We also want to thank WCC, who has loaned us their Zoom account so that we can accommodate the number of participants that we have.
Okay, let's see if this works. Can you hear it?
Yeah, good.
Okay. So that is my favorite video in honor of Hawaii and the people, because that's how much I miss being in Hawaii and knowing that this type of movement that we have created is one that can thrive and do well in Hawaii because of the nature of aloha, and that we care about each other and we care about our kids and whatnot. So that's really important to me. So to start, what I'd like to do is just introduce myself. Like I was born and raised in Kaneohe on a large hog farm. I see my cousin online and she's gonna start chuckling, but which is now on the intersection of Likelike Highway and Kahikili Highway, the interchange. I went to Kapuanahala and then to King Intermediate and Castle High School. Just a little note, I was a runner in school, and that's not track and field. I was a runaway from the school, and my principal and my mom used to chase us back and forth to get back to school. So I share that with my students all the time that are runners in the school. So it was a hard time in those days, and it gave me that experience to become a really good principal. And I think the reason why the trauma-informed school philosophy and setting was because of the aloha that I have in my heart, and that the compassion becomes really easy when you come from a culture like Hawaii, where all principals and teachers and staff members are asked to lead with compassion. So what I'd like to share is the school that we're talking about, and it's called Cherokee Point Elementary. And I have a short video about the school. The school became trauma-informed in about after working with the teachers and the staff about 3 years after. So about 3 or 4 years before I retired, it became a trauma-informed school. And we'll talk about what is a trauma-informed school, and what makes it a trauma-informed school, and the practices that we use in restorative. So before we start the video, though, I wanted to share with you that Cherokee Point is located in Mid-City area of San Diego. It was a Title I school, 100% free lunch, 100% under the poverty line, high crime, drug gangs area. 85% were second language Spanish, so we're about 15, 20 minutes freeway ride to the Mexico border. And the last 3 years before I left the school, we were noted as 0 suspensions for the last 3 years. So the teachers and the staff decided that they don't believe in suspensions. And after the presentation, you're gonna know why the teachers believed in that and why it became a trauma-informed school. And the importance of teachers and staff and parents realizing that there are alternatives to punitive consequences in education. And so in my heart, I want to not prove, but encourage a lot of people like you, and especially people in Hawaii, that a trauma-informed restorative justice school is a way to go, because what we're doing is we're leading with compassion, and we believe in children, and we believe that with a trauma-informed restorative school, learning will take place. So as you're watching this video, I would like you to notice the school and community partnerships and the high parent involvement. So it's going to give you some examples of what we did at the school to make it a trauma-informed school. And this says, this video, there's other videos that I'm going to share with you that we're not going to watch, but there's a parent video. You can just go on YouTube and type in Cherokee Point Elementary, Godwin Higa, and all the different videos will come up. And it was funded by the California Endowment. And they brought filmmakers and other technical people to come and film and the school in our efforts to become a trauma-informed school. So let me see if I can make this happen. Can you see that, Derek?
No, it's very fancy.
You're good, Gavin.
How's that?
Yeah.
Okay.
What you gave me, I have hanging in my office at home. I framed it. I'm going to save it my whole lifetime. Two things you got. And the little birdhouse is hanging outside the house.
Still have it?
I still have it. You think you'd like to go down and talk to City Council? We'll talk about that today.
Students from Cherokee Point Elementary School in City Heights asked local leaders questions about what can be done for people in need. Next week, Cherokee Point Elementary students will speak before the San Diego City Council to share their ideas on improving the situation.
I have worked with youth in City Heights for 16 years, and I have told them that entire time, City Heights has the power to change the world because the whole world lives there. It is one of the most diverse communities in the entire United States of America. It's about 1.5% of the geography of the city of San Diego. It's a tiny little postage stamp. It is 15% of violent crime, 25% of murder, and the highest domestic violence in the city of San Diego.
all the teachers, the principal, all the people that work with students have to understand that students come to us with some sort of trauma. So when the students come to school and they're not feeling well or they're acting out, it's not about go to Mr. Higa. It's about what is happening with you, what can I do to help you. We lead with compassion.
Understanding the whole child, where they're coming from, how we treat students with respect is the trauma-informed philosophy. It's about relating to the students and really opening your heart.
I grew up in a domestic violence family. I remember at 2 years old when my father didn't like the food my mom cooked for him. I remember him throwing it against the wall and pushing her against the wall. What trauma does, it affects your brain. So it stays with you for a long time. So we have a program here where parents can learn more about trauma informed. You can go to training, you can go to counseling. It's all free.
Administrators and people that ask, how do you do this? I can say you need to lead with compassion. Are you enjoying school?
Yes.
Oh, good. But it takes more than just saying the word compassion. It takes a team, a huge team.
I think that the thrilling part about what we're doing now at Cherokee Point is that we're not each individual domain acting in isolation, but that we really are connecting every single one of those dots, and we are interconnected. So we're looking at access to health care, school climate, early intervention and prevention, and restorative practice as a unit, as a whole, rather than as separate.
I think it's really exciting to have this kind of school, university, community collaboration. We have this mixture of people from criminal justice, nursing, police, probation, university professors, all working together. We have about 30 undergraduate and graduate students who major in child and family development, and they work at Cherokee Point, and they're helping to support the teachers in the classroom, particularly in the pre-K and kindergarten classes. They work with the parent leaders and they work with the youth leaders as well. Principal Higa has always been advocating for community involvement in his school. So it makes it a place where families want to go. They have coffee and get together. And it's just a very nice, safe, welcoming school. And that's so critical for treating trauma, creating safety, building relationships, and having collaborative efforts all working together for the same goals.
Restorative justice really at its core is about looking at difficulties not so much as an opportunity to separate the good guys from the bad guys, but as an opportunity for healing, to look more deeply into the causes as well as the consequences of wrongdoing and intervene in a way that can make those consequences learning opportunities.
We changed suspension policies already, that we are not going to suspend. We had 0 suspensions last year. Nobody was suspended.
A key ingredient of what we do at Cherokee Point is working with the teachers on how to deal with children who have experienced trauma and who might be acting out or failing to thrive as a result of living with trauma.
I was one of those teachers who was hardcore discipline. I used to make a lot of referrals. I had a stack of referral notes in my desk for just, for kids who I just believed were just disturbed and needed to be out of my classroom because they were preventing me from teaching. If somebody came to me several years ago and tried to convince me otherwise, I would probably just say, you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, it's a paradigm shift. It's a way of looking at things differently, going from how can I stop the behavior to what's going on in their lives.
You have to care about your students just as if they were your own children.
What if that was your kid getting in trouble? Then would you want the school to help them?
We have many homeless students. Most of our students are English learners, and many of our students have one parent in jail.
You're sharing a top bunk with 3 people. How well can you be sleeping? You know, these are problems we don't think about. Let's help change the behavior instead of just punishing for the behavior.
We practice restorative justice here, where the victim and the victimizer talk to each other and share their feelings and really express to each other how they feel about what has just happened and really find a way to work through it. Really teaching them to be resilient to the challenges that come at them, because they do come at them every day.
I thought, are you guys friends?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, you have to remember, friends don't fight. Friends are nice to each other, right?
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Instead of continuing to get in trouble and ending up in our jail systems, they know how to deal with the controversy in their life. The most important thing that we can do if we're implementing a trauma-informed system is sit and talk to the children. Just listening to them and seeing what they have to say. Just that first step will make a big difference. Instead of asking students what's wrong with you, we need to ask our students what's happened to you.
Compassion is a quality that teachers absolutely need to have. And in a school environment, it really goes a long way in helping students become not only better students, but more caring and compassionate people themselves.
Creating a compassionate school, trauma-informed community school, to me, it's the model of wrapping around the needs of the community, and that's done in a plethora of ways. There's the backpack program. 100 students go with a backpack of food every weekend. There's breakfast in the classroom for all students. It's 100% free and reduced lunch school. So they get fed twice a day. If children need shoes, there's a partnership with Payless. There's lots of new shoes available. There's a food pantry at the school. It is a whole child holistic model for the well-being and health of students.
If there's a need on Mr. Higa's campus, he's going to look for a partner that can meet that need for his children and for his families. If you meet the needs of the family's going to meet the needs of the student.
When he first started at the school, he visited literally every family, got to know them, saw them in the home. And again, that's important for understanding what the families are dealing with and what kind of community he's working in. And so a lot of our focus has been on supporting the parents.
What better way to enhance parental involvement than create the opportunity or access to leadership?
What happens in our neighborhoods has an immense impact on the broad scope of life.
Welcome everybody coming in. Please have a seat. Our parent leaders are going to lead the workshop today.
Y al principio la palabra líder suena como que da miedo. Pero no, realmente pues ser líder para mí pues es trabajar en equipo.
Lo que aprendes aquí es algo que toda la vida te va a servir.
Parent leaders, Superintendent Martin would like a picture with you. Parent leaders.
This is the beginning.
Sustainability is always on our minds. Part of the reason that we're at Cherokee Point is we're working with elementary age students with the full intention of escorting them onto middle school and onto high school and stick with kids and families through the progression.
I'm incredibly excited and honored to be here. We're expanding our youth leadership out of Cherokee Point Elementary, and with Mr. Dennison and also Mr. Dave Downey, the principal here, they've allowed us to come in, and this Thursday we start a Restorative Justice Social Leadership Club here with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, many of whom we've worked with in Cherokee Point Elementary. So we have a continuum from ages 8 through 8th grade.
When we look at some of the work that Dana Brown is doing with youth leadership, it's not just what happens on school campus.
Look into their hearts. Look into their eyes, okay?
Hey, you.
I feel excited because we're going to be the next generation of leaders.
I'm gonna go speak
speak to a lot of people and show them that we're the youth leader kids of Cherokee Point.
I feel proud of myself because this is an honor. In the name of those we have lost to violence, I see change. I will not be a bystander. I will take steps to educate myself and support those around me living with violence and work to actualize a violence-free community.
San Diego will become the next trauma-informed community beyond City Heights.
That's great. You're going to be a politician. You're going to have your
Was it fun?
Not one of us can do everything, but all of us together can. I do think that that is what's making a huge difference, is that we're all connected. The teachers are understanding what the therapists are doing. The therapists understand what the youth leadership is doing, and the parents, they're having their own personal realizations.
Entonces, yo ahora el futuro pues lo veo brillante, como una luz.
Pero siempre traemos cargando algo. Por eso es muy importante estar informado sobre el trauma.
Si yo recibo algo, yo trato de darlo para atrás. Entonces yo he recibido mucho de esta escuela. Mis hijos reciben mucho de esta escuela. Entonces, pues, ¿por qué no? Yo dar lo que he aprendido. Y mucho de lo que he aprendido es el tener corazón. There are many opportunities for schools to receive funding to change the culture of the school, to make the school better, to create a trauma-informed school. I see you smiling again. All right. I'm hoping that this movement will spread like wildfire, and I know that this is the right way to go. This is absolutely the right way to go.
Change is upon us. We all have power. Is it to be used to help or harm?
Okay, so that is Cherokee Point Elementary. And every time I look at that, I want to go back and become a principal again, because I miss the kids so much. But the big question right now is, why trauma-informed? Why do we want a trauma-informed school? And the biggest thing is, as a trauma-informed school and community, we need to stop throwing our kids out by expulsions and suspensions, stop the school to prison pipeline. That's mostly affected by the children of color. So we want to change the punitive policies that exist in the Department of Education, the federal government policies and whatnot. So that's the biggest goal that we want to work on, to create a more compassionate school. So what are the benefits of a trauma-informed school? There's significant improvements in academic achievement. And that is really easy to figure out, because when kids want to come to school, and the principal and the teachers and the kitchen workers and the custodian, all of them are welcoming the students, especially in the classroom. We know that kids' minds are like sponges, and when students come to school in a more compassionate setting, their minds open and they really work hard in their studies. One of the things that is really noted is the National Association of School psychologist, has pointed out that trauma-informed schools promote feelings of physical, social, emotional safety in students. A shared understanding among staff about the impact of trauma and adversity is important. So many organizations right now, not before, are identifying and being aware that the importance of trauma, the effect of trauma in children and adults. And so we're going to talk a little bit right now about what do we do and how do we find out about all these kids with trauma. And I know that many of our kids, I'd say 80, 90% of my students came to us with high ACE scores. So what I want to do is explain to you what ACEs is. And this is a ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experience Study. This study was actually put together by the Kaiser Permanente of San Diego. And so the adverse childhood experience, that refers to traumatic incidences in childhood and were identified by the CDC, Kaiser Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And what they did in San Diego with Kaiser was the study was started with 17,000 participants, looked at how 10 types of childhood trauma or ACEs affected long-term health. These include physical, emotional, sexual abuse, physical and emotional neglect, living with family members who are addicted to alcohol or other substance abuse, and who are depressed or have other mental illnesses, experiencing parental divorce or separations, having family members who are incarcerated, and witnessing a mother being abused. So these are all these different trauma that occurs in children and adults. And so this ACE study asks those questions, and there's 10 questions that are asked, and some of them are pretty graphic, so we don't ask children the question. But this next video that I'm going to show you is by Dr. Burks, and she's going to talk about the ACEs. And also, after the video, I'm going to give you the ACE survey, which is going to be confidential to yourself, so that you can understand where we're coming from and why it's so important that we know what kids are coming to us and adults are coming to us at our campuses or in the community. So there's two different situations that Dr. Burks is going to talk about. But the big one is ACEs, and you're going to hear a lot about ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. She also talks about things like, it's called the fight or flight stress response. And FFSR is one that is an effect of trauma that happens in children and adults. So ACEs is ACEs impacts the limbic system or the brain. And we're going to talk about the brain research and the evidence of the brain, damaging of the brain later after the video. But this fight or flight stress response is very important to know, as well as ACEs. And what it is it's a system that was intended to kick into gear when mankind was faced with physical danger. So in the prehistoric times, or during times where animals or other humans attack villages and whatnot, they experience this run or fight situation, and we call it the fight or flight stress response. So the difference of today and before it was more physical harm, where you're going to stand your ground and you're going to fight them off, or you're going to run away. But in today's situation, it's more about stress that is triggered by thoughts. So this changed from physical to more mental health type issues. And so the triggered by thoughts, emotions, and memories of negative experiences, not so much by immediate physical danger. So today, in the world today, children and adults are experiencing more mental health issues because of the trauma that they went through in their early lives. So the ACEs survey pretty much talks about experiences that you might have had before the age of 18. Because what you're going to find out is that when these traumatic experiences are not taken care of, and when you experience all of these situations, then it affects your mental and physical health. And we're going to talk about that too. But the current fight or flight situation occurs a lot, especially in elementary, middle, and high school students, where with their trauma that they experience, a lot of teachers and people that don't understand, they think the child is spacing out, or they're being punitive to each other or fighting and things like that, but they don't realize that this is really a fight or flight situation and dealing with ACEs and the number of trauma that they had in their lives. So if we understand after this presentation, if we understand about the medical and the physical harm that happens in students and adults, it makes it really clear the importance of having a trauma-informed, compassionate focus in schools and the community. So in other words, the fight and flight of today in the mental health situation and not in the physical harm situation, it might be like anger at a parent over a mean or horrible things that might have been said to each other, with a teacher's reprimand, or fear of what's going on or what's going to happen to them when they get home from school. Those things, as a principal, I always made sure that before the parents come to school, and what happens when I'm training principals is the first thing that happens when there's a fight or an incident in school, the principal would tell the secretary, call the parents and I want them here right now. And that, what happens there is the parents are, either in my case, when 85% are Spanish speakers and they're 50% or more undocumented from Mexico, their jobs are really important, and that's their livelihood. So when we say, get the parents in my office right away, many of the parents are so fearful and get really angry at their children before they even come to the school, because they have to leave work and they might, the chances of them losing their job is pretty high. So what I did in this case was to tell the, always ask the secretary to ask them, Mr. Higa would like to see you about a situation that happened, but let us know when is most convenient for you. He was here at 5:30 in the morning. You can come before work, or he can stay late at night. But it's no biggie, but we just want you to be part of the team to resolve this type of issues. So there's little things that can happen in the school system and in the workplace that can relieve this type of situation, so that when the parents come to school or someone at work come to a meeting, they're not already stressed out and angry. And guess what happens with the kid when they get home? They're re-traumatized somehow, or they're beaten and abused. So those are little things that you want to realize when we know that most kids come to us with some sort of trauma in their lives. So those things are really important to understand, because the ACEs is part of the evidence-based research that happened in San Diego, which is becoming worldwide, and also understanding the fight and flight situation, especially in the workplace and in the school system. Once you understand those two major issues, then you're going to understand why it's important that communities and school systems need to really look into changing the way we do business and education. So this video that I'm going to show you is by Dr. Burks, and she's She was part of this organization that I'm with. It's called 4CA, California Campaign to Counter Childhood Experiences in California. And our organization that I'm with is one that I want to possibly bring to Hawaii, is to change legislations and policies in California that is more trauma-informed and restorative in the education system and other mental health, medical situations, and all these different organizations that occur in government. So Dr. Burks was part of this organization that we worked on we went to Sacramento once a year to meet with legislators to talk about trauma and all that and get them educated about what our efforts are and to change policies in that way. So Dr. Burks, we got a new governor in January last year, and he made her the California Surgeon General for his term. So we're really excited because this is one way to get city government and state government to look at the efforts that we're trying to move to change the way we do business in education. So let me try this video, and I think you're going to enjoy this a lot.
Godwin, as you put the video up, do you mind trying to maximize the screen? There should be a button in the bottom right-hand corner.
Okay, let me try that.
Yeah.
Introducing Amazon Halo analyzes body fat percentage, a better indicator of health than weight or BMI alone.
That's okay?
In the mid-90s, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente discovered an exposure that dramatically increased the risk for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States. In high doses, it affects brain development, the immune system, hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. Folks who are exposed in very high doses have triple the lifetime risk of heart disease and lung cancer, and a 20-year difference in life expectancy. And yet doctors today are not trained in routine screening or treatment. Now, the exposure I'm talking about is not a pesticide or a packaging chemical. It's childhood trauma. Okay, what kind of trauma am I talking about here? I'm not talking about failing a test or losing a basketball game. I am talking about threats that are so severe or pervasive that they literally get under our skin and change our physiology. Things like abuse or neglect, or growing up with a parent who struggles with mental illness or substance dependence. Now, for a long time, I viewed these things in the way I was trained to view them, either as a social problem, refer to social services, or as a mental health problem, refer to mental health services. And then something happened to make me rethink my entire approach. When I finished my residency, I wanted to go someplace where I felt really needed, someplace where I could make a difference. So I came to work for California Pacific Medical Center, one of the best private hospitals in Northern California. And together, we opened a clinic in Bayview Hunters Point, one of the poorest, most underserved neighborhoods in San Francisco. Now, prior to that point, there had been only one pediatrician in all of Bayview to serve more than 10,000 children. So we hung a shingle, and we were able to provide top quality care regardless of ability to pay. It was so cool. We targeted the typical health disparities: access to care, immunization rates, asthma hospitalization rates. and we hit all of our numbers. We felt very proud of ourselves. But then I started noticing a disturbing trend. A lot of kids were being referred to me for ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But when I actually did a thorough history and physical, what I found was that for most of my patients, I couldn't make a diagnosis of ADHD. Most of the kids I was seeing had experienced such severe trauma that it felt like something else was going on. Somehow, I was missing something important. Now, before I did my residency, I did a master's degree in public health. And one of the things that they teach you in public health school is that if you're a doctor and you see 100 kids that all drink from the same well, and 98 of them develop diarrhea, you can go ahead and write that prescription for dose after dose after dose of antibiotics, or you can walk over and say, what the hell is in this well? So I began reading everything that I could get my hands on about how exposure to adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. A colleague walked into my office and he said, Dr. Burke, have you seen this? In his hand was a copy of a research study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. That day changed my clinical practice and ultimately my career. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is something that everybody needs to know about. It was done by Dr. Vince Felitti at Kaiser and Dr. Bob Onda at the CDC, and together they asked 17,500 adults about their history of exposure to what they called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Those include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, parental mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, parental separation or divorce, or domestic violence. For every yes, you would get a point on your ACE score. And then what they did was they correlated these ACE scores against health outcomes. What they found was striking. Two things. Number one, ACEs are incredibly common. 67% of the population had at least one ACE, and 12.6%, 1 in 8, had 4 or more ACEs. The second thing that they found was that there was a dose-response relationship between ACEs and health outcomes. The higher your ACE score, the worse your health outcomes. For a person with an ACE score of 4 or more, their relative risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was 2.5 times that of someone with an ACE score of 0. For hepatitis, it was also 2.5 times. For depression, it was 4.5 times. For suicidality, it was 12 times. A person with an ACE score of 7 or more had triple the lifetime risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of ischemic heart disease, the #1 killer in the United States of America. Well, of course, this makes sense. You know, some people looked at this data and they said, come on, you know, you have a rough childhood, you're more likely to drink and smoke and do all these things that are going to ruin your health. This isn't science. This is just bad behavior. It turns out this is exactly where the science comes in. We now understand, better than we ever have before, how exposure to early adversity affects children. It affects areas like the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure and reward center of the brain that is implicated in substance dependence. It inhibits the prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for impulse control and executive function, a critical area for learning. And on MRI scans, we see measurable differences in the amygdala, the brain's fear response center. So there are real neurologic reasons why folks exposed to high doses of adversity are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior. And that's important to know. But it turns out that even if you don't engage in any high-risk behavior, you're still more likely to develop heart disease or cancer. The reason for this has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear. But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. Children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affect brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. So for me, this information threw my old training out the window, because when we understand the mechanism of a disease, when we know not only which pathways are disrupted, but how, then as doctors, it is our job to use this science for prevention and treatment. That's what we do. So in San Francisco, we created the Center for Youth Wellness to prevent, screen, and heal the impacts of ACEs and toxic stress. We started simply with routine screening of every one of our kids at their regular physical, because I know that if my patient has an ACE score of 4, she's 2.5 times as likely to develop hepatitis or COPD. She's 4.5 times as likely to become depressed, and she's 12 times as likely to attempt to take her own life as my patient with 0 ACEs. I know that when she's in my exam room. For our patients who do screen positive, we have a multidisciplinary treatment team that works to reduce the dose of adversity and treat symptoms using best practices, including home visits, care coordination, mental health care, nutrition, holistic interventions, and yes, medication when necessary. But we also educate parents about the impact of ACEs and toxic stress the same way you would for covering electrical outlets or lead poisoning. And we tailor the care of our asthmatics and our diabetics in a way that recognizes that they may need more aggressive treatment given the changes to their hormonal and immune systems. So the other thing that happens when you understand this science is that you'll want to shout it from the rooftops, because this isn't just an issue for kids in Bayview. I figured the minute that everybody else heard about this, it would be routine screening, multidisciplinary treatment teams, and it would be a race to the most effective clinical treatment protocols. Yeah, that did not happen. And that was a huge learning for me. What I had thought of as simply best clinical practice, I now understand to be a movement. In the words of Dr. Robert Block, the former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. And for a lot of people, that's a terrifying prospect. The scope and scale of the problem seems so large that it feels overwhelming to think about how we might approach it. But for me, that's actually where the hope lies. Because when we have the right framework, when we recognize this to be a public health crisis, then we can begin to use the right toolkit to come up with solutions. From tobacco to lead poisoning to HIV/AIDS, the United States actually has quite a strong track record with addressing public health problems. But replicating those successes with ACEs and toxic stress is going to take determination and commitment. And when I look at what our nation's response has been so far, I wonder, why haven't we taken this more seriously? You know, at first, I thought that we marginalized the issue because it doesn't apply to us, right? That's an issue for those kids in those neighborhoods, which is weird because the data doesn't bear that out. The original ACEs study was done in a population that was 70% Caucasian, 70% college educated. But then, the more I talk to folks, I'm beginning to think that maybe I had it completely backwards. If I were to ask how many people in this room grew up with a family member who suffered from mental illness, I bet a few hands would go up. And then if I were to ask how many folks had a parent who maybe drank too much, or who really believed that if you spare the rod, you spoil the child, I bet a few more hands would go up. Even in this room, this is an issue that touches many of us. And I'm beginning to believe that we marginalize the issue because it does apply to us. Maybe it's easier to see in other zip codes because we don't want to look at it. We'd rather be sick. Fortunately, scientific advances and, frankly, economic realities make that option less viable every day. The science is clear. Early adversity dramatically affects health across a lifetime. Today, we are beginning to understand how to interrupt the progression from early adversity to disease and early death. And 30 years from now, the child who has a high ACE score and whose behavioral symptoms go unrecognized, whose asthma management is not connected, and who goes on to develop high blood pressure and early heart disease or cancer will be just as anomalous as a 6-month mortality from HIV/AIDS. People will look at that situation and say, what the heck happened there? This is treatable. This is beatable. The single most important thing that we need today is the courage to look this problem in the face and say, this is real, and this is all of us. I believe that we are the movement. Thank you.
Okay, so that is Dr. Burks, and a side note here is what's exciting is I'm teaching a class at the university. It's called Trauma-Informed Systems, and one of the books that the students have to, well, it's a mandatory book that they read. It's called The Deepest Well. If you can pick up that book, that would be great. It's not really expensive, but The Deepest Well is Nadine Burke, Harris Burke wrote. And she stated in there that there's some promising note for the Biden administration where she met with Kamala Harris at a conference and talked about ACEs and all the different studies that she did in San Francisco and all the successes that's happening. So she really wants to know more about it. The other thing is Nadine Burke, Dr. Burks created a organization called ACEs Aware. If you jot that down, ACEs Aware, and it's acesaware.com. And on that website, it's really focused on pediatricians and other healthcare providers on screening ACEs and screening trauma situations with children. So it's on acesaware.com. She also provides a screening tool for students. Remember I said that we do not give the ACEs survey to children because of how graphic it is. So we're going to take the survey in just a second. But for those who are interested in what do we do to identify ACE scores for children, you can go to acesaware.com, and there's some sections that you can, the tab that you can go to and look at the type of assessments that they do to screen children in that case. So what I like to do is have you take the survey. I will read out the questions, and on a piece of paper, just write down, or you can keep in your mind, it's only 10 questions, the number of yeses that she referred to, and then we'll talk a little bit about it when we come back. Hey, how's that, Derek?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, so we're going to start the ACEs question, and just jot down your yeses, and we'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. So question number 1, before your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adults in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Yes or no? Number 2, before your 18th birthday, did a parent or other adults in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or even were injured? Number 3, did an adult or person at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have touched their body touch you in your body in a sexual way, or attempt to actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Yes or no? Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? Your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Yes or no? Number 5, did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, or had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? Yes or no? Was a biological parent ever lost to you through a divorce, abandonment, or other reasons? Number 7, before your 18th birthday, was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, or sometimes or often or very often kicked, beaten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit over at least a few minutes, or threatened with a gun or knife? Yes or no? Before your 18th birthday, number 8, did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker, alcoholic, or who used street drugs? Number 9, was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? And last, before your 18th birthday, did a household member go to prison? Okay, so count the number of yeses that you don't have, you need to tell me or anything, but can you hear me, Derek?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so count the number of yeses. I know many times when we're asked these questions, it can be very difficult. And as I read these questions, I always think in my mind, these are some of the experiences my students went through. And I can say that a high percentage of students in all the schools go through these type of situations in family beatings and things like that. I had a lot of students that were sexually molested or sexually abused. I had a lot of students that were physically abused. And the CPS or Child Welfare Service in Hawaii, but CPS in California really knew me because that was one way to get the parents help. Unfortunately, with parents under poverty, sometimes the only way they can get therapy and help was to be referred to the Child Protection Agency. And once they're referred, then they can get access to a lot of different mental health situations and resources. But when I read those questions, I know in your mind, if you work with children or adults, these things actually happen. And we need to be aware of that. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you is when all of us take the survey and we are really honest about it, the biggest thing that the ACEs study is promoting is when you know your number, it could be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10. Once you know your number, the goal is for you to seek help. So it's not just a number that you're going to ignore, but one that in your mind, you're going to say, wow, I'm a 5 or a 6. But there is a serious or evidence-based correlation between the high ACE scores and your mental health and your physical health situations. So if you're a 5, if you have 5 yeses, you're probably going to be homeless or be in poverty. If you're 6 or 7, you're going to attempt suicide. And it's a really clear correlation between the number of ACEs, the high ACE scores, and what's happening to you in your physical and mental world. So the reason why ACEs is becoming so popular is because of that correlation. And the reason why we're here today is because it's a serious matter. And if we're looking at community and education system, we tend to ignore the fact that the child is misbehaving, that they probably have a high ACE score because they have child PTSD happening in their lives, or we ignore the situation because of selfishness or whatever the reason is. So the important part about knowing your ACE scores or knowing that people are walking around with high ACE scores is to seek help or to get help. And so I think the goal of Ko'olapono is to make people aware and maybe seek foundation help for resources that can happen in the Windward area, like it did in Cherokee Point. So what you saw in the video was different community people coming together and helping. And those things that happen in the video are all free. You know, I just went out to San Diego State and got the professors to meet with me and say, can we have your nursing department? We had 18 nurses at a time each semester. And what they did was they did presentations in the auditorium with the parents, and parents could jot down all the concerns that they had. And those are all free. And we had interns that were all free. The 30 students that you saw walking up the ramp for early childhood education, those were all people that needed volunteer hours. So when you look at ACE scores and you look at the correlation and the importance of knowing your ACEs and the importance of knowing that all of us, especially children that are so vulnerable, are walking around with high ACE scores because of what the questions were asked. And it's true. The sad part about this, now that I'm teaching at the university, there's this book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, and it's by Dr. Perry. I realized after teaching this course that the trauma that my kids were going through that I knew was so surface trauma. And when reading what Dr. Perry, the psychologist, wrote about his experience with children, made me my heart just sank, because I didn't realize the deeper trauma that kids are experiencing in our world and in our schools that principals and teachers are not aware of. And these are deep physical abuse that's happening to children. And in my mind, I'm thinking, I didn't even know about these things, and all I'm doing is looking at children with surface trauma. And now I wish that I learned more about traumatic experiences. One really terrible thing that happened was one of my students' parents were deported to Mexico, and this little third grader came to me and said his mother died. And I said, what happened? And she said, when she tried to cross the border, she died on the way back into the United States and somewhere in the hills of Otay Mesa. And that just crushed me, where this poor little kid, all that trauma, losing his mom because they was deported, and then finding out that the mom died on the hills of San Diego trying to come back. So those are some of the traumatic things that kids are going through that we tend to, as adults, when we're working with kids or in the community, we just overlook. So I'm hoping that after you learn about all of these, and there's so much more to learn, that when we look at children and we look at adults that are being rude or being angry, that it's a different type of outlook that I have, where I forgive more, because I know that these adults or children are going through so much that we're not aware of. So before we move on to the brain research that I want to share with you, some of the things were touched upon with Dr. Burks, but I wanted to go a little bit further on that. But let me share with you this situation with one of my colleagues at a conference. And she did what I just did. We did the survey and all that, and she said, don't tell me what your score is. And this 90-year-old lady raised her hand, and she said, oh no, I don't want to know your score. And she said, no, I want to say something. So they let her speak. And she said, I just wish someone asked me these questions sooner. Because now my whole life, I felt with blame and shame, and I felt miserable. I was a mean person, all that. And I realized how high my ACE score is and the amount of trauma that I went through, and I never went for help. I never sought help to see if I can repair the harm that happened in my brain and things like that. So that's a terrible story to go through. So that's why the ACEs study and ACEs itself is so important, that we just be aware of your number and try to seek help when you can. And that's the whole major purpose of that, okay? Okay, so what I would like to do is quickly go over the brain research and what happens when a child or an adult goes through trauma. And so there are 3 parts of the brain that are highly affected, the neurological effects of the brain when a person goes through trauma. So think of your ACE score, and think of ACE scores of children with high traumatic experiences. And these are some of the scientific part or the brain research part of what happens when people are faced with toxic stress or high stress trauma. So the three parts that I want to address right now is called the trauma in early childhood can result in disrupted attachment, cognitive delays, and impaired emotional regulations. Also, the overdevelopment of certain pathways and the underdevelopment of others lead to impairment that's caused by that. And that was Dr. Perry again talking about what causes, what the research is on the brain. So there's three sections of the brain that's affected, highly affected. And the first one I want to refer to is the prefrontal cortex. And this involves in the highest order of cognitive abilities in children and adults, and behaviors, personality behaviors, expressions, decision-making, and social behavior. So when a child goes through or an adult goes through traumatic experiences, the prefrontal cortex is affected, and that's the behavior part, the personality changes. The child is sitting and screaming and yelling or getting angry, and the social part is missing. And it's because of that trauma that the child has gone through. The amygdala is the ability to feel emotions, giving meaning to emotions, remembered emotions, and attach to associations and response to feelings. The amygdala is right in the center of your brain there. And that when you look at people or you look at children, when they just sit there staring in space or things like that, they're being affected by their emotions. They tend to not respond to you. So teachers might say, why aren't you answering me? Or why, get on this, go outside, you're not behaving well, or whatever it might be, not realizing that that's with that toxic stress that they went through is affecting the amygdala. And the hypothalamus, this part of the brain, the lower part is close to the amygdala, is anxiety, mood swings, feeling irritable, cognitive behaviors and decision-making, social behavior, and personality expressions with past and present memories. So when a child goes through this, or an adult go through that traumatic experiences, they have that sense of anxiety, they have their mood swings, they become very irritable. So as a teacher or principal, when children come to us with that type of behavior, we tend to not realize that their trauma that they went through really affected their brain. So one of the things that the overstimulated amygdala is responsible for survival-related threat identification, plus triggering memories with emotions. After the trauma, the amygdala can get caught in a highly alert loop. So when children or adults get into this situation, they're might be in a panic mode, or it affects their, it triggers their memories of a sense of like PTSD that's happening, things that children have to face and think or their memories of the traumatic experience occurs. And so those parts of the brain is affected. So then the overactive hippocampus is shown in people with PTSD. So that part, it's really important. And I always talk about child PTSD moments. And once we understand that the child PTSD moments are really based on their experiences, It could be where a child in the classroom or an adult at a conference may say something, a word or a music that they're hearing, things that might trigger the memory of that awful traumatic experiences, that when that trigger comes out, it could be a physical reaction or a verbal reaction that comes out. And a lot of times we tend to think that the person is being rude or the child is being unruly, things like that, okay? So in a nutshell, I would like you to listen really carefully about, I'm gonna read to you something that I found and put together in my research about building a trauma-informed responsive community schools and systems of change through compassionate engagement. So when you look at the number of situations that affect the brain and the 3 parts of the brain that's highly affected through the traumatic experiences, I want you to listen to what I say here, because it gives you in a nutshell why it's important to look at a trauma-informed community or trauma-informed school. So the description here that I wrote is trauma-informed responsive schools means understanding of neurobiological impact of trauma. That's what we just noted. Trauma-induced fight and flight response, fear and trauma responses activated limbic system of the brain and governs arousal and emotionally reactivity. Ability to access the prefrontal cortex, which governs the abstract thought and problem solving, is comprised of children experiencing trauma stress, and in learning. There are long-term consequences of the brain development, the amygdala, emotions and given meaning, emotional memories, and hypothalamus, expressions of emotions of pleasure and rage, uncontrollable outbursts must be understood and addressed appropriately. And that's when people understand all of these factors, you become a more responsive trauma-informed school. The trauma-informed care in a trauma-responsive school and community means understanding the trauma effects on learning and behavior, attention and information processing, executive functions, planning and problem solving, attentiveness to classroom tasks, emotional regulations, aggression, impulsivity, and teachers may describe when they're not aware of the brain research and the trauma-informed philosophy. Teachers might describe a student as spacey or zoned out, disrespectful or rude, lacking intelligence, out of control, anxious, unknowing, aggressive, but in a responsive school would be most important for teachers and parents to understand. And when that happens, a community and school becomes a liberator. So the good news about all of this, when children and adults are going through all this trauma experiences and toxic stress, the research indicates that damages can be reversed, okay? So the amygdala can learn to relax again. The hypothalamus can resume proper memory consolidation, and the nervous system can heal and flow between the reactive and the restorative mode again. So these are some of the things that can happen to heal. If you go and seek help, and if we understand all of this and we can help children, there are medications, hypnosis, neurolinguistic programs, neurofeedback, cognitive behavior therapy, eye movements, desensitization, and other brain-related modalities. The bottom line is that the mind has to reframe and release the trauma that the brain has experience. So recovery is gradual, though. The process accomplished over the successful methods of treatment being varied. So the great news is with a lot of patience and help through the medical doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists, there's hope for children and adults to go through that. And there are a lot of success stories that are out there with people with high ACE scores that became functional and leaders of the community that overcame the trauma that they've experienced in their early childhood. So there are a lot of stories out there with people that recovered. So the main point that we're presenting here is that once the schools or the community understand about trauma and ACEs and fight or flight situations, we become more aware, and this will help in the school setting. So this way, trauma-informed restorative justice school setting is a must. Schools tend to re-traumatize students with their punitive consequences and not leading with compassion. And that's happening everywhere, not only in Hawaii, but California. Many of the schools in the States, I would love to work with our new superintendent that's going to happen soon in California and in the nation. So those are some of the things that we want to be aware of, and some things that I would like to address that continues in the school system. And as parents, you might want to look into this, and teachers kind of look at this, where we tend to use punitive consequences on students. And when we talk about re-traumatizing students, there are so many things that's happening in the classroom that re-traumatize students, and teachers don't realize that, and principals. So for instance, in restorative justice, in classroom management and repairing the harm, a lot of times we see in the classrooms where we want to advise or encourage teachers to remove the public humiliation practices on students and adults. And some of the examples that I share with the teachers, and whenever I work with teachers and principals in Hawaii and here, to remove the red, yellow, green charts that are hanging in the classroom. What it is the red, yellow, green is when the child is doing really great, they put that little clothespin with their name on it on the green card section. Yellow is you're either becoming a good student or you're going down to the red and becoming a problem child. So when your name is placed in the red section, you're a naughty kid or you're not behaving well. So when you understand trauma-informed and ACEs, you're going to realize that that student that's always in the red section or in the yellow section probably have a high ACE score, and they gave up and they just don't care what the teacher says or what the students are saying. So that again is another public humiliation and re-traumatizing of students. Putting names on the board, publicly putting names on the board of students that are not going to go to recess is another public humiliation that I work with teachers and principals on. Calling out the disruptor constantly, that's another public humiliation. But anyway, when I talk about public humiliation, we have to kind of look at when I'm working with principals, I always ask the principals, how would you like if Ann Mahi or your district area superintendent have a red, yellow, green card, and when the principals come for the meeting, they put all your name on the red card that didn't turn in their projects or talking too much at the meetings and things like that, or teachers, how would you like the principals bring out a red, yellow, green card or put your name on the board. And so they all laugh about it, but then they come back and they say, you know, like I had a teacher that I worked with just recently. I did a training with school, and one of the teachers raised his hand, and I said, oh yes, and he says, you know, Mr. Higa, I'm guilty of that. I have a red, yellow, green chart. And after learning about the effects of the brain and trauma in our students, I'm gonna tear that up and I'm never ever gonna use it again. And so I highly complimented him and for realizing that that is public humiliation for students that are experiencing such traumatic experiences in their lives, hunger, poverty, abuse. And I commended him in front of all his staff. There was 50 staff members on Zoom. And I said, you know, that was such a wonderful thing that you did. And you faced the music and you in front of all your colleagues, admitted that you're doing this and you decided that you're going to tear it up and never use it again. That is fantastic. So those are some of the things that happens in the schools that are really not really a good thing to be doing in schools and in public. So what I'd like to do next is to talk about restorative justice. And restorative justice in the school setting is so important because once the teachers and the adults in the school, the entire school learned about trauma-informed practices. And you know what was really interesting? We talked about trauma-informed with the staff and we had training and all that, but it never clicked with my staff until they learned about the brain research, how it affects the brain. And then they did some correlations and then they did some observation and realized that by, like the teacher in the video says, we don't ask students what's wrong with you, because as soon as you say what's wrong with you, it becomes a negative and the students will shut down. But if you say, hey, what's happening? You know, what's happening to you? They will automatically come out and say, you know, my grandma passed away last night and I'm not feeling well. And so they'll freely come out and say those, make those comments in a way that it's so important to get kids to talk about their hurt feelings and whatnot. So in restorative justice, we do a lot of repairing the harm. And I have here what's called a peace path. And what it is the peace path is a down version of restorative justice. And restorative justice is the whole purpose of when there is an incident that we want to repair harm, we get a group together and sit down and we ask these questions and each person will talk, and it's really a listening thing that that's most important. So in the video, you saw some peace path restorative justice where the little boy and girl was in my office and the little boy tried to kind of debate me on things like that. It was kind of funny. But what the teacher does is have the victim and the victimizers face each other and talk about it, and no interruptions. And the adult is just a facilitator. And the first thing is the victim will tell the victimizer what happened and why it hurt so much. It could be physical or name calling and things like that. And the goal is to have them touch the heart of each other. This is how I felt when you did this. And so what's working here is the goal is to not have repeat incidences. So I think in my case in the school, we had, as we started working with the peace path and restorative justice, less students started coming to the office because what they did was the teachers used it in their classroom, and they then, when there was an incident in the classroom, they said, go to the side and resolve your issue, and they were able to do that. So using the peace path and restorative justice, restore the injustice that happened, change the whole recess situation. There's no fights. lot of, somewhat arguments and whatnot, but they resolved their issues. One of the greatest thing that happened at Cherokee was all the schools in the area had a police officer assigned to the school. And my police officer came to me 2 years before I retired and said, Mr. Higa, you don't really need me here. There's no fights. And all I'm doing is standing here and playing with the kids. And well, that's good too. He said, the biggest problem that I have is parents driving in the wrong way in the parking lot. So what I did was I talked to his chief, and they transferred him to a different position. But what he did was he started training other officers about restorative and trauma informed. So that was a great plus. So we saved a lot of money there. So in looking at the trauma and restorative justice and trauma informed, it's really important. So some of the things that you want to know with the peace path and trauma informed is, you want to share the ground rules. Everyone agrees to listen and participate. You talk about what is the harm, who has been harmed, repair the harm, future intentions to avoid harming another or doing it again, agreement and conclusion, and the follow-up is really important. So I'd like to do an activity with you. And if you could pick up a piece of paper and a pencil, if you have something near you. And what I'd like you to do is to draw a stick figure. It could be 1 or 2 stick figure on a piece of paper. So if you just draw 1 or 3, or I put 3 stick figures with happy faces on them. You could do this in your organization. You could do this with your teachers or staff or even family members after you go home or you're at home already. But after you discuss trauma informed and ACEs and all that. But if you have this in front of you, what I'd like you to do is after you draw this happy face on that, I would like you to crumple up the paper and get really angry inside and think about all the negative things that happened to you or your child, the words that come out and say, ugly, you're stupid, things like that, that make you feel really hurt, and just crumple that paper and get angry and really get it. And I see some of you doing it in front of me, really perfect. So, so once you do that, think of all the negative things that happen in your life and take it on the paper itself, okay? The next thing I would like you to do is start unraveling the paper. So unravel the paper that you just crushed up and think of all the wonderful things that happen in your life and words that come out of your significant other or people in your workplace or in your family that says you're beautiful, you're always so caring, I love you so much, and I feel so good that you're here, things like that. So what I'd like you to do is spend some time taking all the creases off of this paper. Spend some time, just go on your table and use your fingernail and try to take out all those creases and lines that on there. So you see this paper, and it's all crumpled up, and you unraveled it, and you see all those lines that are still there. What do you see on that paper on the stick figures? You see them still smiling? Okay. Made a happy face, and after doing all of that, you see them still smiling. All those creases on there is what happened, the traumatic experience that happened to the child or an adult, and those creases are what affected the brain. So all those little creases, if we don't take care of it, it remains that way. So you might be smiling in front of your colleagues or your friends and your family, but deep inside in your mind and your heart and the children that are walking around with trauma, they're not going to be able to get rid of those creases until they get help. And don't be the 90-year-old lady that raised her hand and said, I wish they asked me these questions before so that I could get help. And the getting help is to start getting rid of all these creases with the help of professionals. So whenever I do this conferences, that little activity, how small and minor it is, that actually was given to me by a police officer that said, oh, Mr. Higa, let me show you something, since you talk about the brain research and all that. And I said, this is so perfect. I want to use it. And I got his permission to use it because it's true. Until we get help, until we figure this out, we really want to look at the research and the resources that are happening. Okay. So I have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to rush. I have so much to tell you, but what I like to share with you is what's happening in Hawaii. So what's really troubling that's happening in Hawaii, and I always bring this up whenever I work in the schools with principals and teachers, is we have to be aware of the sense of urgency and immediate actions needed. And I think that Ko'olau Pono, this organization that newly created, is heading towards a very positive way to address this. But one of the biggest things that I want you to leave here tonight or today is to understand that nationwide, the third highest suicide rate in the United States are ages 10 to 24. You can jot these all down. Why? They asked the survivors and the people, the students that attempted suicide, they said that the reason why they attempted suicide and the ones that are probably felt this way when they killed themselves was a sense of hopelessness. Can you believe that? And when you think about it, what causes hopelessness is the question that you should have, especially hopelessness in ages 10 to 24. Hawaii in 2017 was in the top 10 in the nation of suicide, all suicides. So you're in the top 10. The big question or the thing that I want to promote is we have to look at pre-K. You know that from 0 to 4 is the greatest learning that happens in a child, 0 to 4-year-old. So when the child is going to preschool, when you have a compassionate school where learning is taking place in a beautiful way, and we know that there's trust and we're building trust and we're giving hope to the students before the age of 10, we're going to prevent students from committing suicide. So when students were asked in a survey in Hawaii, if they had someone in their school, teacher, principal, adult, custodian, or someone that they could go to if they needed someone to talk to, many of them, a high percentage of the students that took the survey said no. I'd say about 47% of the students that took the survey, and it's called the Healthy Kids Survey that's given in Hawaii to all middle and high school students. So the the Student Healthy Survey 2017, there were 7,000 students, middle school students that were asked the question, responded to the survey, and 6,000 high school students. 47% of the middle school students had a sense of hopelessness, and 3,600 high school students, 54%, and 2,700 students had the same feelings of hopelessness. I'm not sure if you know of this survey, you can look it up, but it's called the Youth Risk Behavior Surveillance System. You can look it up in the internet. And the most recent is 2019. You can click on the state. So I clicked on the state of Hawaii, and this was shared to me by Laura. And what it showed in Hawaii, and they asked this question. The questions are asked, if you had one or more times during the 12 months before the survey, the students were asked, middle school, ever seriously thought about killing themselves? 38.5% females said yes. 16.75% of males said yes. Total 27.2 surveyed said yes. In high school students, females 24%, males 13%, total surveyed 18% said yes, they want to just noticed that my battery was going down. So those are troubling situations that's happening in all different states, but particularly in Hawaii. So when you look at the attempted suicide and the feelings of killing themselves, it's pretty alarming in Hawaii. In the attempted suicide, for instance, 17.8% females attempted suicide, males 8.6%. Overall 13% attempted. In high school students, 8.9 students, all high school, females 11 and males 6.65 said they attempted suicide in Hawaii. So it's pretty alarming to me when you look at what's happening in our school system. But I have some promising news for you. The promising news to address this is there's a SB 691. If you look it up, it's a Senate Bill 691. It's training for all students in Hawaii about suicide prevention. I was really excited to see that. And the reason why someone wrote this bill, there's a whole bunch of people that wrote the bill in the Senate chamber. They put a note, and I jot this down. In Hawaii, on an average, one person dies by suicide every 2 days. Suicide is the 4th leading cause of death for children between the ages of 10 and 14, and is the leading cause of death for young. So this bill is still pending, but it also asks for requires 2 hours of annual in-service training for suicide prevention for all teachers, principals, and counselors. The one that your governor recently signed, good news, is SB 383. And if you want to look it up, you can go to the website, and it's pretty detailed what they're asking. And it requires the Department of Education in Hawaii to establish a mandatory youth suicide awareness and prevention training program and model risk referral protocol based on the existing materials created by the DOH, the Department of Health, for all public schools, including charter schools, require charter schools, and provide training program for all risk referrals. So that was passed and signed on July 12th, 2019. And the great news is when that passed, I was actually in Hawaii, and I witnessed and Mahi Nanakuli Waianae trainers sharing their experiences going to school after school doing the 2-hour training on suicide prevention. So they took action right away. So that is great news for them. So lastly, what I would like to do is kind of share with you some promising future and some things that happen in Nanakuli Waianae and their data real quickly. The graduation rate is +10 in Nanakuli, 71% to 81%, Waianae 69% to 78%. So they're increasing the graduation rate, which is outstanding. The suspension rate in 2014 was 1,151. In 2019, it dropped to 378 in all the schools, minus 773 numbers. Incidences in 2014 was 4,052 incidences in their database. In 2019, 1,184, which is a minus 2,868 less incidences in the school. This is the biggie. Teacher retention rate vacancies. In 2011, there was 117 vacancies in schools in Nanakuli and Waianae. Right now, in 2019, there's 57 vacancies. This is a great indicator that the schools are leading with compassion for all students and adults. And when you can keep the teachers there, that means there's a huge indicator that the school is practicing compassion. The principals are changing the way they're doing business and education. All students and adults are treated with respect and compassion. So those are huge indicators that we should be celebrating. Some of the things that we did so far with Kaneohe Elementary School is creating a trauma-informed school, great school. I did some 2-day training with the entire staff, from teachers all the way to support staff and cafeteria workers. It was so amazing the way principal encouraged all his staff to do that. And it was a great learning environment. The training was on July 20th and 30th in 2019. So the ultimate goal here is to increase graduation rates, of course, college bound for all students, and 0 suspensions that we create the compassionate school. So what's happening right now is in the progress right now, what's happening in Hawaii is we're addressing the needs of the school and the community with trauma-informed movements, addressing homelessness, poverty, crime rates, and involving the faith community. The role of the school is creating a school of compassion. We want to start changing punitive policies that principals and teachers have to follow because of the state and district policies that are more punitive than helpful. So like I mentioned, the 4CA, that when I go to Sacramento, those are some of the things that we want to start attempting to do in Hawaii. And one of the greatest things that happened, again, there's so many great things that's happening in Hawaii. AB 2412, trauma-informed training, and that was the work of your Kaneohe Representative Lisa Kitagawa, who hosted the bill and passed the bill, and it's just wonderful things that's happening. We want to shift school and community culture and focus of no suspensions. And when we say no suspension, the alternative to no suspensions is stop sending the kids home, but get the kids resources and help in the school. Resources for students and family is the most important. Stop throwing away kids. We met, Derek and I and Ann Mahi met with Josh Green, your Lieutenant Governor. Very promising and positive interaction in the meeting. And that's the type of things that we really need to work on and do to inform legislators, inform leaders in the community about the purpose and the trauma-informed focus that's happening in the community. So like, again, the next step for me and Dr. Burks is to work with the administration, the new administration in the United States, starting with Kamala Harris and other people that are involved. So in closing, I have 2 minutes left, and I'm gonna show you my last wonderful video that kind of wraps everything up. So here you go.
bicycle? Did you see that? Why would somebody do that?
Please go into the classroom, no talking, quietly.
Hey, Miss Merida, how you doing?
We need you inside.
How do you think that makes us feel? I forgot my number.
What's your name?
Jordan.
What's your last name?
Carter.
All right. Go ahead.
School is hard enough.
Come on in, sit down quietly at your desks, and begin writing.
This kind of stuff just makes it harder.
I said quietly, please. Who's talking? Is it you, Sophie? Don't let it be you.
Don't believe me?
Sophie.
Please just watch.
I'm not up here for me, I'm up here for you. Pay attention, okay? Now somebody answer me. Somebody needs to answer me really fast.
Every time we're ignored or yelled at or silenced, the teacher takes away what's possible.
No horseplay, no running, and especially no talking.
Moment by moment.
Miss Garrity, your students' behavior yesterday in the lunchroom, it was terrible. Next time, silent lunch.
Did you hear that? Stay in line and catch a bubble. I'm not playing.
If this is education, we're in trouble. Bye, Miss McGarrity. Frederick Douglass said, once you learn to read, you'll be forever free. The way it is now, 2 of the 3 of us will never be able to really read. It doesn't have to be this way.
Hey, Jordan, how you doing? Good.
Everyone we meet throughout our day can make a difference.
I've been waiting for you to arrive.
All the difference.
Good, how are you?
Great.
Hi, Jordan. Bye, Jason.
Good morning, Jordan.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for asking. How are you?
Good.
Go ahead and put your number in.
Talk with us, I don't know my number. not at us.
That's okay. I'll look it up for you. Go ahead, sweetheart.
Okay.
All right.
Teach us what we need to know.
Good morning.
That's how we get smarter.
Well, good morning, Sophie, Janicia, and Jordan.
And when you talk with us and teach us, give us bigger and bigger words.
Now what I'd like you to do, children, is turn around and converse with your neighbor and discuss where the mother might have gone.
Words that we can use to read and understand. She is prey for eagles, so she hunts at night. And that will take us places we can never reach without you.
Remember, we're entering the learning zone. Now, how can we show our respect to the children and teachers who are working?
We can walk quietly.
Yes. Okay, kids, so what I'd like you to do is continue writing your narrative, documenting your emotions if you were the baby owl and your mother abandoned you in the nest.
What can you do? Learn all that you can so that you can challenge us to be our best.
You would have stayed and assisted them in whatever they needed.
Share yourself with us and show us how to share ourselves with others. Give us courage. Give us compassion. Help us find our own voices so we can become who we are meant to be. Why would you want to silence us?
Thank you, Godwin. On
Thank
behalf
you.
of
You're
Compassionate
welcome.
Poco and all those attended, I am always left with inspiration every time you share your stories and resources with us. And thank you to Windward Community College for helping us to host the Zoom, and Desiree for being on our steering committee. For those that may want to stay connected with this work, we invite you to join and follow us on Instagram, Compassionate Poco, and we have a partnership with Adventist Health Castle, who's doing the tree lighting tomorrow. We have a little cameo there too. We have a evaluation too today before you leave. If you could share with us what was most valuable, what questions you may still have. I know Godwin has offered to help follow up on the questions, both in the chat and maybe those in the evaluation. And maybe if you have some ideas for further trainings as well after this. So we thank you so much for the stories and the resources that everyone shared in the chat throughout, and for just being here as learners in this space with us. So thank you, Godwin.
You're welcome.